Maneka Gandhi was denied a passport, and the question was whether this denial was justified under the provisions of the Passport Act. The denial was without any hearing and without any observance of the principles of natural justice. The Supreme Court characterized this action as arbitrary, unfair, and unjust, and said that this action was illegal in law and violative of the doctrine of equality. Ultimately, it directed that a post decisional hearing be given to Mrs. Gandhi, and that is where the case ended. And in R.D. Shetty versus International Airport, again the question of arbitrariness and capriciousness of state action was considered, where the International Airport Authority was giving contracts for catering at the Indian airport, at the Mumbai airport, and the question was whether they had acted arbitrarily in selecting a contractor. So the law of equality went still further, and it went into the rights of the or the duties of the court to examine whether an administrative action, whether a judicial action or a executive action conform to the principles of lack of arbitrariness and was just and equitable. This was a very welcome development in the field of constitutional law because an administrative caprice or an administrative or any form of administrative discretion which was violative of the principle of arbitrariness could be corrected by the court. For Royappa's case, Hardik Shetty's case, and Maneka Gandhi's case were the three classic cases on the new dimension to the right of equality.
उसको बैग मत काटिए क्योंकि इसको वेब कैसे हट जाती है
Now,
फोन में
ultimately, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible. You are audible, sir.
Yes. Because I have an unequal battle here. I'm hearing other sounds also apart from mine. Anyway, so your lordship, and you will see then the principle of equality went on, and one of the interesting fields in which the principle was tested was the field of taxation. And one of the classic cases which came up before the Supreme Court was the Bearer Bonds case, which was filed by a leading advocate of his time, Mr. R.K. Garg. Mr. R.K. Garg was a great intellectual and a known Marxist who filed this case and challenged the provisions of the Bearer Bonds Act. The Bearer Bonds Act was a very interesting act. If a person went and purchased a bearer bond, he could do it by cash, and there were no questions asked as to from where he had got the money. So this was a provision under which black money could be made white, because once a bearer bond was purchased, it could be utilized in any manner and could be encashed later on and made into completely white money. This was challenged by Mr. R.K. Garg, and he said that this puts an impetus to dishonesty and it allows people with black money to make it and convert it into white by an official statute of the state. Supreme Court, however, Supreme Court, however, went on to say that this was a valid piece of legislation, as the object of this legislation was to see that money which was outside the stream would come into the economic stream and become white money. In fact, they said that in matters of economics, the state must have a lot of play in its joints and should be able to do much more than in other non economic statutes. This led to voluntary disclosure schemes which are formulated from time to time. This has led to settlement schemes which the state has formulated from time to time. And this has added a new dimension to the law of taxation. However, the journey to fight for justice and equality continued. And one of the classic fights, as you know, in the Supreme Court, first started in the Delhi High Court, was on the provisions of Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. The Indian Penal Code, as you know, was drafted more than 150 or 70 years back. 377 was a provision which punished homosexuality. It was a provision against gay sex, and therefore this was something which was challenged by a few individuals in the Delhi High Court. Justice A.P. Shah was the Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, struck it down as unconstitutional. The matter went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court set aside Justice A.P. Shah's judgment. But ultimately, a few years later, in Navjot Johar versus the Union of India, in 2018, the Supreme Court had a fresh look at Article 377, and a new principle of the doctrine of equality was initiated by the Honorable Supreme Court. This was a doctrine of what is called manifest arbitrariness. This doctrine, the Supreme Court said that even a legislative action, because Section 377 was a legislative provision, even a legislative action would be struck down if it was manifestly arbitrary. So far, the law allowed striking down of legislation for violation of fundamental rights, but not on the principle of equality, except on the principle of classification. And it was administrative and executive actions which were struck down as arbitrary and capricious. But for the first time, the Supreme Court said even a legislative action, and this was a pre-constitutional law, a legislative action could be struck down as manifestly arbitrary. And in these circumstances, that provision of Section 377 of the IPC was struck down by the Honorable Supreme Court. This led to a lot of development in the Honorable Supreme Court. And the most classic enunciation came up by Justice Nariman in the Triple Talaq case, which was the Saira Banu's case, which was decided by the Honorable Supreme Court. Perhaps you're aware that in this case, there were five judges who decided it. Two judges said that Triple Talaq is a part of personal law and cannot be interfered with. They said it is for the legislature and for the parliament to interfere with this provision. They were not able to strike it down. Justice K.M. Joseph held that Triple Talaq was not part of the Mohammedan law at all, and therefore Triple Talaq was not valid. However, Justice Nariman, who spoke for himself and Justice Lalit, said that Triple Talaq had its sanction under the Shariat Act. This was a legislative provision, and according to his enunciation, a legislative provision could be struck down if it was manifestly arbitrary. So the principle of manifest arbitrariness was enunciated by Justice Nariman because he was one of the three judges who struck down the Triple Talaq. So he became part of the majority judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. So manifest arbitrariness was born, and this became a new dimension, a new ground to challenge any legislative action of the parliament or of the state legislature. So Triple Talaq judgment went on with various other judgments which followed. And the most classic enunciation of that came up in the law of arbitration. The Arbitration and Conciliation Act, as you know, was amended in 2015, and many far-reaching amendments were made. One of the amendments was that if you challenge a monetary award, an award which has awarded money to one party against the other, and if that party who has lost challenges the award, he is required to deposit the money or submit to such orders as the court may direct before he can challenge the award. This was the provision which was added in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. Various people argued that this would not apply to proceedings which are already pending in the court prior to the enactment of this provision, because there are many petitions which were filed in the High Court and in district courts challenging awards well before 2015. And the question was whether in those existing petitions also a deposit was required to be made. In the Bombay High Court, this was debated before Justice Sundur Baldota, where I appeared for the BCCI and argued that no such deposit order could be made because this was an earlier petition. Various other advocates argued to the contrary. The learned judge held against us, and she said that this also applied to pending proceedings, and this provision was required to be complied with. The matter went to the Honorable Supreme Court, and it is known as the famous case of BCCI versus Kochi Sports. It's 2018 6 SCC, page 287. There, Justice Nariman, who presided over, argued that pre-deposit is a requirement which has been enunciated by the new provision. And on his interpretation of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act amendment, this would apply even to pending proceedings. So proceedings which were filed in 2012, 13 or 11, like in Kochi's case, would be governed by the principle which came into force in 2015. And therefore, Kochi was required to deposit, the BCCI, which had lost the matter, was required to deposit the money, although the proceedings were pending. Now, this led to a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and Justice Sri Krishna was asked to look into this question, and he made a report saying that the pending proceedings would not be covered by the new provision. Now, this report was considered by Parliament, and Parliament amended the Act 2019 by adding Section 87 and said that unless the parties otherwise provide, arbitration proceedings which are commencement of the Arbitration Amendment Act 2015, principle of pre-deposit will not apply. So Supreme Court therefore set aside or put an end to the enunciation of the judgment of Justice Nariman in BCCI versus Kochi Sports. Justice Nariman had said that the provision of 2015 would apply to pending proceedings. Parliament said it will not apply to pending proceedings. Therefore, Parliament was because of the parliamentary provision, people went to court and said, we are not going to deposit, we are going to withdraw our deposit because this is the pending proceedings. The matter was carried again to the Supreme Court, and 5 judges of the Supreme Court, presided over by Justice Rohinton Nariman, once again looked into the validity of this amendment. And by applying the principle of manifest arbitrariness, they struck down this provision, and they said that we had said that this applies to pending proceedings. Parliament is manifestly arbitrary when it says that it will not apply to pending proceedings. Therefore, the Amending Act of 2015 must apply even to pending proceedings, and deposits are required to be made even by people who challenge the award, although the challenge is well before 2015. It is in these circumstances that the principle of manifest arbitrariness is a new development in the field of the doctrine of equality. So the doctrine of equality or the principle of equality is a dynamic concept. It's a concept which has been developing, and I'm sure that this concept will keep on developing. It applies across the spectrum to gender justice, to fight for justice, to help people who are underprivileged, to help people who are deprived in society. As you recollect, Dr. Radhakrishnan was our president earlier, had said that a society in which the happiness of a few depends upon the misery of many cannot stand. So it is the doctrine of equality to which we have to look to get answers to many of the riddles which are facing us, and to hope that the law develops in that direction. The law can develop at the hands of lawyers, but most importantly, at the hands of students who are studying law. Because you can put up more questions than the answers that professors can give you. And therefore, this occasion, although it's an occasion where I speak to you on the net, it's an occasion to strive hard to improve and preserve the doctrine of equality. The The doctrine of equality has now been expanded to the doctrine of justice. It is expanded to prevent manifest arbitrariness. So, justice is the greatest virtue to which the doctrine of equality and the fundamental right of equality is now going. This is the new frontier of the fundamental right of equality. The bar has been raised, and this raised bar must now be confirmed by the new students and the new practitioners of the field of law. The field is very vast. Your fight will be for justice, equality, liberty. These were the foundation stones of our Constitution. This, I'm sure, is enough justification for today's meeting. A bigger justification than that is not necessary. And I'm sure a lesser justification than this you will not accept.
Thank you so much, sir. Really an enlightening session for all of us, and we really benefited a lot. Over to you, Salim, sir. You can unmute yourself, and now we can have the question answer session.
Thank you, ma'am.
I hope my entire speech was audible. Yes, any questions, please?
Sir,
Yes, please.
sir,
Yes,
Along with all the audience and the participants will be enlightened to to receive the gamut of knowledge that you have shared, sir. In this very short span of time, you have brought us towards the entire history of this. Not taking much more time, I would like to start with the question answer session, sir.
yes,
So there is
please.
a question from a participant, Rebecca, asking for what is your view on the judgment delivered under 377.
This judgment, which is under 377, is a judgment strictly in accordance with the principle which is enunciated by the Supreme Court, that anything which is manifestly arbitrary, anything which is contrary to gender justice, is illegal. And therefore,
Hello.
this judgment, yes. Yes. Are you able to hear me?
Sir,
Yes. So this judgment is completely in consonance with the principle that a law which is manifestly arbitrary, a law which is contrary to gender justice, must be struck down as illegal. Although this was a very old law, and although there was a Supreme Court judgment supporting the section, the Supreme Court set aside that and went on to say that this is illegal. So this is part of the principle of gender justice. You must remember that everybody does not agree with everyone on these principles. There are people who may have their own views, who may have their own type of thinking, or who may have their own DNA. All that has to be respected, and therefore 377, which was contrary to that principle, was struck down. In fact, this was one of the earliest cases, as I mentioned, where the principle of manifest arbitrariness was enunciated by the Honorable Supreme Court. Yes.
sir, another question is from
Sir.
another audience, Savitri Dhani, sir. She said,
Yeah, please speak into the mic. I can't hear.
sir, I will repeat the question. It is
Hello.
from Savitri Dhani, sir.
Yes, please. Yes.
She asks, respected sir, keeping
Yes.
the present scenario on the pandemic in view, why Article 14 is not implemented in its spirit as far as migrant workers are concerned?
As far as migrant workers are concerned, unfortunately, they are the victims of this lockdown, and it is something which is very difficult in the sense that they don't have the means even to approach the court, and they don't have the time or the ability to approach the court. This is a deprived section of society. Cases have been filed in favor of migrant workers in the Honorable Supreme Court, but unfortunately, no proper relief has been given. It has been left to the executive to give relief. And this is something which really can be tackled in the court. Whether the court will interfere or not is a different matter, but this is really something which is violation of the right of equality. It's something which is unfair and unjust, and something which requires to be redressed. The state is doing its level best, as you can see, but I'm sure the best may not be good enough. Still, something more is required to be done. And therefore, in my submission, the case of migrant workers is a very hard case, which is required to be tackled on a war footing, if necessary, even judicially. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has not intervened, and that may be for reasons which impel the Supreme Court is very difficult to fathom. However, the migrant workers are still struggling. This is what I mentioned, that underprivileged sections of society are suffering. In the old days, when the Asian were supposed to come, the workers who worked to build those stadiums were deprived sections of society. But somebody moved the Supreme Court and got relief. In this case, unfortunately, relief, the court is not yet available. No relief in the form of executive action is being given.
In your view, what is the role of the developmental legislations like the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 in promoting the right to equality?
This is a legislative decision to protect the rights of the transgender persons. We had actually closed our eyes to this section of society, and we regarded it as something which we don't want to look into, as something which was illegal, something which was abhorrent to civilization. But ultimately, they also have their rights, they also have their life, and ultimately the legislature has taken notice of it. Supreme Court itself has taken notice of it. This is why rights provisions like 377, etc., had to be struck down, because they are contrary to the rights of transgender and other people. It may be contrary to their rights, and therefore gender justice is something which was important. This is why this provision is an important provision of law.
Sir, another question is from one of the students asking for, as a law student, what can I do to promote right to equality in the society?
As a law student, you have a wonderful position. I wish I was a law student in these days, because there is so much to do and so little time, and we are also stuck in a lockdown. But this is the time to pick up all the threads of society, to check up where there is inequality, and if necessary, to fight for it in a court. A law student need not wait for a big lawyer to fight his case. There are law students who are fighting cases in the Supreme Court. And in my submission, this is something which a law student can do. These are dynamic times. This lockdown is a great detriment, but it is also a great opportunity. It's an opportunity for learning. It's an opportunity for presenting your point of view. And once you study the law, once you come to grips with the law, it is an opportunity to move the courts. You will be surprised to know, in the last two sessions before the Honorable Chief Justice of Maharashtra, the majority of cases related to COVID-19. And some of them were filed by lawyers who were unknown and who are now struggling and who are now trying to help society. So this is a time for opportunity. The big lawyers may not be arguing, but the other lawyers are arguing. Even students can argue at this time. My submission, we should not be pessimistic. This is a time to open up, to study, and to help society.
Next question is whether COVID-19 shall give a fresh definition to dispute under arbitration. Pradeep Bhattacharya asks this question.
It's a very interesting question Mr. Bhattacharya has raised, because there are various facets which are now coming in. As you know, under the new Arbitration and Conciliation Act, there is a time limit to finish the arbitration. Now the question is that it is not possible with this lockdown, and almost 2 months are lost. In most of the arbitrations, more than 2 months are lost, and further time will be lost before the arbitration can be concluded. So this will be one factor. The other factor will be the issue of impossibility of which measure will be applicable in contractual matters. So in arbitration especially, one of the questions will be, if evidence is required to be taken, can it be taken on the net? If it can't be taken on the net, or if it can be taken on the net, can the demeanor of the witness be seen? Because a witness may get coaching, he may get help. Just as I may look at something which you can't find, but you only find me addressing you. So this may be a handicap in arbitrations, and therefore some kind of amendment may be required to see time for arbitration must not be now 1 year. It can be extended. There is a provision for it. It should be extended, and the lockdown period must be excluded. This would be one of the dimensions which will be as a part of the scheme of arbitration.
Thank you, sir. Me from Dhanbad.
All right, very great pleasure to see. Great pleasure.
I'm also advocate, sir, from High Court and also argued in Supreme Court also. Thank you, sir, for your clarification.
Privilege to have.
बट वो कंसेंट के साथ वाला
Participants,
बस ये
please
है
don't. Participants, please circulate your questions through the chats only, please. Yeah. Sir, the next question was, as per your opinion, what is the role played by the legal aid cell of the college and the legal service authority in promoting right to equality?
See, I have been a part of the Maharashtra Legal Service Authority. In my biodata, you didn't mention that, but I have been there for the last so many years. The Legal Service Authority is a very important authority because it fights for women empowerment, it fights for gender justice, it fights for legal aid, and it fights for settlement of disputes to mediation and arbitration. These are all facets which are not so well known. But if you are associated with the authority, you will see that every year the authority has settled so many cases. Lok adalats are held, many cases are held. So the basic thrust of this authority is to help the underprivileged sections of society, like gender justice, fighting against khap panchayats, helping women, helping underprivileged, and giving legal aid. So at the college level, and in my days in the college level, we worked in legal aid. We were full of enthusiasm for legal aid. Of course, for legal aid, you have to know the law. Otherwise, people will have no confidence in you. They come to you. But legal aid is a very important facet to help in the privileged people. And through legal aid, a lot of cases have been fought, both in the High Court and the Supreme Court. So students can legal aid. They can form legal aid sections in the colleges. Also classify which are the category of cases which come, and have maybe some better expert like a college professor also present to help the people, and also see how cases can be put forward, can be carried forward to help the underprivileged sections of society. Because the people who come for legal aid are the real poor people who cannot otherwise afford a lawyer. So this is where your idealism comes in. This is where your desire to help the underprivileged comes in. And I think a college is a very good time and opportunity to work in this direction. Yes, anything else? Can I? Any other questions? Yes.
From Richa Thakkar, and she asked, do you think we need new guidelines for equality for cases related to domestic violence and abuse?
You see, cases relating to domestic violence and abuse are a very new section of cases which has come up in the Indian courts. And there is a lot of clogging in the courts. Many of these cases are not able to be heard in good time. And unfortunately, cases of domestic violence go through the police. And very often the police are asked to act as mediators to solve these disputes. There is also a talk that some of these cases, there is some abuse, not only of domestic abuse, but abuse of the system in getting the wrong people arrested, etc. These are matters where a new form of jurisprudence has been created, but we don't have the infrastructure to deal with it in a rapid way. We have started a new field where people can get relief, but we don't have the infrastructure. So the cases are clogged in the courts, and these cases, unfortunately, are not moving at the pace in which they are required to move. Because if really there is a case of domestic violence, it requires an immediate and fast redress, and it cannot remain in the court as a part of the statistics of the court. It has to get moving. So this is a field in which we have to all work to see that these cases are taken up at the earliest. And we are reacting with the judges in the Bombay High Court to see that certain of these cases are put on fast track, and special courts are created to help people to get redress in these matters.
Sir, next question is from Mr. Avdut Nilkant. He says that during the lockdown, due to the COVID pandemic in India, there were many instances of violation of lockdown by VVIP and their families. By taking the permission from the higher authorities, it is not the infringement of the legal system, and particularly when it is clearly stated that nobody is above the law. What is your opinion on this?
You see, I can't justify any violation of the principle of lockdown because, as you know, as Justice Verma has said, that be you however so big, the law is always above you. So the law is meant for VIPs, it is meant for VVIPs, it is mentioned for the common man who is thrashed because he gets out of his house, it is meant for everyone. If VIP violates it, then it is a matter of his conscience if the courts are not able to tackle it or the police are not able to deal with it. I don't think this can ever be justified, and no VIP really can get away with it. In fact, public opinion must be created to see that such people do not get the prominence which they claim in public life if they violate a principle of lockdown, which everybody else is required to follow. The common man is required to follow. People are starving because of the lockdown, and VIPs can't take advantage of the system and try and hold their weddings and their functions when everyone else is in distress. So there is no justification for this. The law of equality must apply, and if there is a need for prosecution, as there is, because as you know, violation may amount to an offense, and people are tried for it. There is no reason why people who are big and people who are VIPs should not suffer the same fate. Yes, any further questions?
I repeat the question. He
Yes,
says that
please.
how far you support that reservation violates the equality of opportunity for the open category.
See, this is a very question because right from the time the Constitution was framed, reservation has been provided. And reservation, as you know, has come through a lot of judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court. It has been a matter of great judicial interpretation. One of the issues was that you can get reservation at the inception. Can you get reservation in promotions? The Supreme Court said, but the legislature, by a constitutional amendment, has corrected it. So if there are certain deprived sections of society who require special protection, this is why reservation has been created. Now, reservation would help those underprivileged people, deprived sections to come up. And I'm sure there would be a time when this would become unnecessary. But probably that time is not reached yet. Till that time is reached, it is necessary to help and protect such people. So therefore, reservation is still there as a part of the law, and it is always a matter of constitutional law. It is challenged. As you know, the reservation for backward classes, scheduled castes, etc., was challenged in the Bombay High Court, and there was a split judgment, and the matter is now lying in the Supreme Court. And reservations for Marathas was challenged in the Bombay High Court. There also, the Bombay High Court sustained it, but reduced the percentage, and that is now lying in the Honorable Supreme. So a large debate is expected in the Supreme Court once the lockdown is over on the validity of all these reservations. because reservations in some cases have gone well beyond 50%, which was the original norm, and they've gone well beyond that. So all that will be tested in the Honorable Supreme Court. So you must wait for that, or if you get an opportunity to participate in that debate, which will take in the Supreme Court.
Few more questions with your permission, sir.
Yes, of course.
Sure. Sir, there is a question from Navdeep where he asks, the government has ordered that there will be no liability of the employer to pay wages or salary to the employees during the pandemic situation. It is a kind of order for bonded labor, isn't it? What are the remedies for such employees?
You see, this will be a matter of the industrial law, because ultimately, if a government has passed such a legislation, as a matter of industrial law, it can be challenged, and this can something which will depend upon the individual cases. Where if it's a government employee, he would have constitutional rights. If it's a private employee, he would have rights under the industrial law, and a lot can be said in favor of in favor of the worker if he is deprived of his salary at this time, because the concept of unfair labor practice and is there various statutes in many state laws. So therefore, that can all be invoked, and that will have to be tested in the court. As far as government is concerned, that is an issue which will have to be tested in a writ court, and the writ court will decide whether this is the valid provision. The principle of manifest arbitrariness, the principle of unfairness, all that will probably be applied in such some case is filed in court.
Sir, there is another question. In your opinion, what are the hurdles in the way of enforcing right to equality in India?
The real hurdle is that complete equality is in Ethiopia. And when we said there is a right of equality under the Indian Constitution, as I told you, the earliest judgment of the Supreme Court said that equality is between equals. You cannot treat equals unequally. So that was the rider which was put in the beginning itself. So absolute equality is in Ethiopia. But through the doctrine of equality, through the doctrine of justice, you can fight for the underprivileged, you can fight injustice and try and achieve as much equality as possible, so that the circle of equals is widened and equality is between equals. So if that circle is widened, more and more people will enjoy equality. For instance, in Scandinavia and in some of those countries, the law has expanded to such an extent that virtually everybody gets the same benefits because the circle of equals has increased. Unfortunately, in our country, there are many unequals who are still there. They are struggling to become equal. And the principle is that equality is between equals. Unequals cannot be treated as equals. So this riddle has to be solved. But the real struggle is for the unequals to join that larger circle of equals, the larger circle of the mainstream, the larger circle of the somewhat affluent section of society. And that is the only goal which we should try for. It's a Herculean task because with so many crores, as you know, 130 crores population, a lot of people below the poverty line. So the struggle is huge. But so long as you're struggling, so long as you're ready to fight, the intelligentsia, the young middle class, the young lawyer is ready to fight. The future is bright. One should not be pessimistic. One should be optimistic and try for it. Because remember, from 1950 to now, we have come a very long way. Today, I said in 1983 that triple talaq is invalid and it's not sanctioned by law. But somehow it took so many years, 2018, for the Supreme Court to say that. So the struggle can be long, but it can be fruitful. You have to keep on struggling. You have to keep on fighting. This is the time in your life, a time for idealism, a time for optimism, and you must make use of it.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is another question from Aishwarya. She says, sir, the Muslim personal law allows polygamy. However, IPC penalizes polygamy and the penal code applies to whole of India. Do you think this is violation of Article 14?
No, as far as the IPC is concerned, the polygamy which is prohibited is polygamy which is not permissible according to the law of the party. So IPC does not prohibit polygamy as far as a Muslim is concerned, because it's permitted under the law for the time being in force. As far as polygamy intrinsically is concerned, it is required to be tested, because that is a question which is now before the Honorable Supreme Court, whether personal laws are also subject to the principles of fundamental rights. Because there is a freedom of religion, which is also a part of the fundamental right. On the other hand, there is a right of equality and other rights which are part of the chapter. And one of the questions before the Supreme Court is whether personal laws are subject to the principles of equality. Now, in the triple talaq case, as you know, the Supreme Court, two judges of the Supreme Court, this is a matter of personal law, we cannot go into. But one judge, Kurian Joseph, got over this whole problem by saying that this is not part of the personal law at all. And triple talaq is not sanctioned by the Muslim religion, because many sects of Muslims do not accept triple talaq. As far as Rohinton Nariman and Justice Lalit, they said that this is manifestly arbitrary, but they did it by saying that this is part of the Shariat Act. So they did it by striking down a provision which was a legislative provision. They did not go into the general customary personal law. So that field is still open, and that is required now to be considered by a constitution bench judgment which is looking into this question. But so far, so long as the personal law permits it, it can always be permitted. However, as you know, those who are familiar with Muslim law know that this is something which can be got over at the time when the marriage is celebrated. Because a model Nikah-nama, which was formulated by many lawyers in the old days, was that a wife can provide that the husband will not take a second wife. That can be put as a part in the contract of marriage. And if he does that, then he'll be violating that contract and he'll be liable for consequences, including perhaps a prosecution under the penal code. So this is something which can be protected against. Many lawyers do not know this, and many Muslim wives do not know this. This is something which can be used as a protective provision till such time as these issues are finally decided by the Supreme Court.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I was very fortunate to have practiced at the Bombay Bar for 2 years before joining my college. And
Yes,
in the bar,
we saw you at the bar.
thank you, sir. Thanks. Sir, in the bar, there is a famous story about you. Sir, I would like you to please, in short, narrate that story to the participants over here. That is the 45 rupees case story, sir.
Which is the 45 rupees? Tell me, what was the story?
Sir, that when you were teaching at Government Law College, one of your student referred for a taxation matter to you, where you prepared the entire night and the next day you presented that and you were paid 45 rupees for that.
Yeah, this is a very famous story. This is not only this first 45 rupees. My first case, I argued after many years of waiting in the library without much work. The first case was a case where somebody was liable according to the other side for contempt. And a solicitor came and gave me the brief and said that please protect this man, otherwise he'll go to jail. He's liable for contempt. So I stood up and the other side argued something. The judge was not convinced and he dismissed the matter. So I felt quite cheated because I had come with a long argument to protect my client and I could not speak at all. So without speaking, I came out. And of course, in that case, in those days, they paid 3 GMs for the case. 1 GM was 15 rupees, so 3 GM was 45 rupees. That was the first 45 rupees case. And another case which I can tell you, this can go on, we have to stop somewhere. One case was people who were being forcibly evicted from an area in Bandra. And they came to me when I was sitting in the High Court library. So we quickly drafted it and went to the court. And then we fought and we got a stay, and ultimately, in the long run, they got relief. Uh, I shuddered to ask for any fees because the parties will look so poor, they were on the road. But they said, we insist on payment. So they brought a small envelope to me in which there was a 100 rupee note. And the envelope said, "Forget me not," with best wishes. I treasure that more than the money which I earn in court today. Because that was with great affection and great sincerity that payment was made. Yes, anything else, Professor?
Thank you so much, sir. We all are highly indebted to you that you gave us your precious time and shared your views with all of us. And we are definitely cherishing these stories and we want to hear more, sir. But there are some constraints and we have to stop somewhere right now. So I would just like to again thank you on the behalf of KLE Societies, KLE College of Law. Thank you so much, sir, for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. We are highly indebted to you, sir. Thank you so much. And hopefully, if we, in future, if we organize such a webinar or a lecture series, I believe, sir, that you will give us your time again, sir.
I don't want to speak after the vote of thanks, but I want to thank you very much for having me. It has been a privilege. I love to talk to students. I love to talk to government colleges. I love to talk to law colleges. So it is my privilege. And I learn more from your questions than you probably learn from my answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So we like to thank, I'd just like to thank our moderator as well, Professor Salim Khan, for brilliantly moderating the session and asking the very good questions. Thank you, participants, of posting such good questions that we can get some very brilliant views from Rafiq Dada, sir. And thank you, sir, again for accepting our invitation and coming and sharing your views. So I would like to end the meeting. And thanks a lot, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Rafiq sir.
Because